very painful to go through and to try to understand when a doctor labels you. And once you get that label, it is very hard to take away later. It took me a very long time to deal with the stigma and to deal with the label. I had to accept it, but it took me a very long time to finally accept my illness and my diagnosis. My brothers who were taking care of me were very supportive and made sure that I had the best psychiatric care. So I was getting good care. But for someone who's never dealt with mental illness in their life, it is very stressful and very painful when a doctor who's very prominent, known throughout the world, diagnoses you with schizoaffective or schizophrenia. So I think the stigma not only is outside, but it's also internal. Until you can accept it and accept it, then you can move on. But the first step is accepting who you are and what you have.
Yeah, awesome. Phil, I really like how you just talked about self-stigma and even the label too, because like self-stigma, it is basically embarrassment and shame. And just, when you're having a hard time accepting that you have challenges and problems in life. And so I think that's when, and I think for myself, when I decided to remove the self-stigma and say there's no shame, that's what made it easier for me to come out. And so I also liked how Phil talked about labels, because sometimes not everyone knows how to speak about mental illness and mental health, because people will still say in the newspapers today, the mentally ill, in the newspaper. And that's something that we need to go away from, because it's like if someone has cancer, you don't call them the cancer. and I think I learned that from Jean. We have to tell them, individuals who have been diagnosed with mental illness, that you are not your illness. You do not equivalent to your illness. You have illness. And so that's where it's so important to the way we say, use language in speaking. And so the more acceptable way of talking about an individual they use individual with lived experience, individual with diagnosed with mental illness, instead of the mentally ill, or because some people are still using phrases like how to survive and thrive with your mentally ill loved one. What? Like, are we that much of a burden? So it's like, how about how to thrive with your loved one who has mental illness? Because sometimes we're not trying to, individuals who have been diagnosed, they may seem very difficult to take care of, but it's also, it's not about us versus them, it's about everyone. And how do we work together to help all of us improve our quality of life? So anyways, so next is, what was your turning point in life that led you to speak out about mental health?
Well, I've always admired how Emily is a community activist, and I wish I were born having that streak in me, but
You have a little bit of it.
But it didn't actually start developing until I signed up for what I thought to be a free trip to Washington as a fellowship, and it was an Okura Mental Health Leadership Fellowship. And the first day that we got there, this lovely couple who had been interns during their honeymoon basically said that they took the reparations from the US government and started a foundation so that this would happen to no other group. And when we got there, they said, to the fellows that they had selected, we were a class of 10, and we came from all these different disciplines. So I was representing the psychologist group, and we had other different health professionals. They gave us a brief lecture about if you are educated and you have a voice, because presumably you know the language, if you don't speak out on behalf of your community, who will? And it was such a grave message that I received that I internalized all of the witnessing of domestic violence that I grew up with, all the witnessing of mental illness that had really tormented our family. I decided that I was going to use my experiences and try and help others. So I really do thank the Okuras for giving me the strength and also the conviction to do that.
How long ago was that?
That was in 2002. I defended my dissertation and hopped on an airplane to this free trip. And I kept thinking, like, I can't help anyone. I barely have a degree.